It's To the Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Anne Strange-Champs. Every day, we see dozens of other living beings. Humans, yes, but also dogs, birds, trees, insects. All are fellow creatures on this planet. Now, what if we considered all of them persons?
Human people are only one kind of person. There are maple people, right? And there are Oriole people, and there are cloud people. And that changes everything.
This is Robin Wall Kimmerer, plant scientist, award-winning writer, and enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. And this is her land. 7 acres in the southern hills of Onondaga County, New York, near the Finger Lakes.
We could walk up here if you've got a minute. Huh?
Yeah, I'd love to.
So I grow a big vegetable garden that I can eat out of most of the year. And then the rest of my 7-acre piece, I honestly think of as a garden as well. It's an old field and a little patch of woods and a pond and springs. Almost a self-sufficient landscape.
Oh. What are those?
They're little green herons. They've nested here for years, and their babies make these just awful squawky noises, so that's who we're hearing.
I love that. Yeah. Robin calls this a generous landscape.
A lot of edibles, lots of berries, cordage plants. I really like to do basketry. So I have willows and redbuds, and I grow things like nettles and dogbane.
Look how beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful? That is sweetgrass. Weengushk are one of our sacred plants. Just take it and rub it between your fingers. Pretty soon the fragrance of it will start to be released.
That lovely grassy smell.
Yeah. Most of the medicines that I like to use, I want to have growing here. Heal-all and raspberries, which is women's medicine. Agrimony, which is a wound healer. Yarrow, which is a fever reducer. So that's why I think of the whole landscape as a garden.
A garden and a pharmacy.
A garden, a pharmacy, a library, yeah. There's something inherent about these lands that make you feel taken care of. What else could you say? All of the food, medicine, teachings. It feels like a landscape that loves you back.
We share the landscapes we call home with countless other beings. Trees, plants, birds, frogs. In many cultures, they're considered relatives, our more than human kin. And now emerging science in everything from forest ecology to the microbiome is confirming that. So what changes when you see the natural world as kin? Well, that's exactly what Robin Wall Kimmerer has been writing about for years. It was a hot July day, the summer before the pandemic, when Steve and I first saw her place. We sat together in her front yard, under an enormous maple tree. Our dog and her cat circled our feet, and we talked about the personhood of nature and why that concept matters.
As people, as persons, when the crops are a person, when the trees are a person, when that deer is a person, you can't just take, right? You have to show respect to that person. You have to ask permission. You have to negotiate a trade. There has to be reciprocity.
Personhood also suggests agency, intelligence maybe. It suggests, I don't know, consciousness, does it?
When I say that aspen tree is is a person, I mean it in all those elements that you just mentioned, that yes, this is a sentient being, a conscious being, a being with its own intelligence. Western science tells us, oh, you must not anthropomorphize. I'm not anthropomorphizing. I'm botanizing. That aspen is its own kind of person. It's not like they're human people, they're aspen people.
The maple, that beautiful maple over there. Is there a way to explain its personhood using Western scientific language or not?
So could I prove to you with scientific instruments the sentience of this maple? No. But the science is moving absolutely in the direction to have us understand the intelligence of plants. There are, of course, emerging tools that tell you all about the electrochemical gradients in this maple and what they respond to, and the way, the sophistication with which this tree senses, behaves, makes decisions that are so sophisticated and beyond our knowing.
I love your concept that our society has become plant blind, that our grandparents could identify many more species of plants just sitting here in the backyard than their grandchildren we can.
Absolutely.
Well, not you.
It was a matter of survival. We are hardwired to know plants. We have this taxonomic part of our brain which is so good at discerning one thing from the next. And of course we had to. When you think about the hundreds of thousands of plants that there are, you had better not be plant blind. You had better know which one of those is medicine and which one will really give you a stomachache. So absolutely, so much of us, who we are, is a legacy of needing to know plants. And it's just this eye blink of time in the industrial age that we have become plant blind.
So when you say plants are our relatives, you're actually saying genetically?
I'd have to look up and remember what the fraction of our DNA that we share, me and that maple tree right there, it's over 80%. The chlorophyll molecule that powers everything in the trees is so similar to your hemoglobin. For me, one of the most powerful kinds of relatedness is that as I'm talking to you, the carbon dioxide that is coming out of my mouth is seconds later being made into sugar by our maple companion.
Seconds?
Seconds. The air that we are breathing right now is their exhalation.
Which means that we and the tree are one being, in a way.
We are indeed.
For you, you've been studying the Potawatomi language, Anishinaabe-Moan, and some of this you said is embedded in the language.
It is. If we think, for example, of that grapevine climbing on the pole over there, I would say to you, hey, Steve, look at it. Right? If Anne was over, they'd say, look at her. We have a different language for each other, but all of nature gets termed it. And in English, we have no escape from that. It is the manifestation of that worldview which objectifies nature. And in Anishinaabe-Moan, it is not possible to speak of that robin or that strawberry as an it. It is not possible because we speak with a grammar of animacy.
Is there an animate case and an inanimate case?
Exactly. And it's a verb-based language. So one of my favorite examples is that you hear the wind with an animate verb, but if an airplane went over, we would hear it with an inanimate verb.
Oh, so there are cases for the verbs too, animate and inanimate verbs.
Well, most of our language is verbs. It's about 70% of the Anishinaabe-Moan is verbs, and 70% of English is nouns.
Can I follow up on some of the language that we use to express notions of kinship? I know you've sort of been exploring that notion of even what the word kin means, and can you talk about that?
I was doing kind of a thought experiment about how we might animate English. And with the guidance of my language teacher and elder, I was looking for another pronoun that we could use. And he gave to me, he said, well, the word in our language for just a being is bemadizi, aki. And aki means the earth, and that little sound ki, I've been suggesting we could use as a replacement for it. So when we look at that grapevine, we say ki is climbing the fence. And it slides right next to he and she. He, she, and ki. And I played with that idea for a long time, and then realizing that you'd need plurals, and that we already had that beautiful word in English of kin. And it's so happy-making, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, you think about a flock of birds migrating, and there go our kin.
Exactly. I'm going to go up in the fields and be with my kin and see if they'll give me some berries. It just changes your whole orientation. I mean, think about how we do this. We walk through the world saying, that's a pine. Well, would I say of my neighbor, that's a human?
How did we forget all of this? The language and the worldview that you're describing were here for millennia, probably, before European settlers showed up.
This change of worldview was not a passive forgetting, was it? This change of worldview from the industrial, colonial, frontier mindset to overlay the indigenous way of knowing was no accident. It was very, very deliberate. And of course it was. If you came into a world where you saw that those pines were people, teachers, ones who were giving you medicine, who were caring for you, would you come in and claim every damn one of them for the King of England? Would you put his mark on them? Would you devastate the landscape? It was a genocide of pines in our way of thinking. And it's tied to this notion of human exceptionalism, that we're at the top of this pyramid of intelligence, of spirituality, of resources, of any way you cut it. Human beings, according to Western religions and Western economies, are at the top. Everything else belongs to us.
And speaking of plants, plants are often at the bottom. Where would indigenous teaching place plants?
Plants are understood as among the most revered of beings. And my Haudenosaunee neighbors have the beautiful language for this. They say that human people are the younger brothers of creation. We are some of the last ones to come here. We're still trying to figure out how to live here, obviously.
Like toddlers, we're kind of making a mess.
Yeah, we are. But there is this other way of putting your hands in the earth and getting to work and saying, yeah, we've made a lot of mistakes, but we can be healers too, and we have to be healers too. So this is the veggie garden. I've been growing a lot of heritage beans.
How many kinds?
Let's see, there's cranberry beans, there's bear beans, there's a bean that we call the Potawatomi rabbit poop bean.
Why? How did it get that name?
They look like little rabbit turds.
Robin Wall Kimmerer tends 7 acres of land on the historic territory of the Onondaga people. And you can see photos on our website at ttbook.org. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend Robin's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. The 6-year anniversary edition is just out and climbing the bestseller list. Well, this is a pretty big garden to cultivate.
It is. It's a joy.
Coming up, do plants deserve moral, even legal rights? We'll make the case after this. It's To the Best of Our Knowledge. From Wisconsin Public Radio and PRX. There are stories in almost every culture about plants that are intelligent, sensitive, and communicate with people. You just have to know where to look.
I've chosen here what I've entitled The Birch Tree Weeps, which is a story from the Kalevala, a region of Finland. It's a cornerstone of Northern European mythology.
This is plant scientist Matthew Hall.
So the story is really about Wainamoinen, a magical bearded character who does enchanting singing. People say that he's a bit like Gandalf. And Wainamoinen has lost his cantaloupe. It's a small wooden traditional string instrument. And he's lost it and he's walking through the woods where he hears the birch tree weeping. Wainamoinen approaches the birch tree and he asks it, why is it weeping? So the birch tree talks about how human beings have joys and sorrows, and that the birch tree itself has its own sorrows. The birch tree points out that in summertime, human beings are often very happy, but the birch tree doesn't have a lot of happiness. He says, naught but wretchedness awaits me. My bark is peeling from me. Children come with knives and cut the branches or drag off the leaves from the birch tree, and the sap starts to flow. Even the girls come beneath the branches and dance, and they take leaves for their crowns. And then into winter, things turn even worse. When people come thinking about taking fuel to keep warm. Wainamoinen listens to all this and at the end tells the birch not to cry anymore, because Wainamoinen has a way of transforming this suffering really into something that transcends the birch tree situation. So Wainamoinen had lost his cantala. That was a wooden instrument. And so from this birch tree, he shapes a new cantala, and the birch then kind of lives on in Wainamoinen's music. This story is so unusual in the Western tradition. We get something very unusual, which is the perspective of a plant. Not just a plant that speaks kind of human truths, but this plant here, this birch tree, tells Wainamoinen its own troubles. A very, very different take on the world than we've come to inherit.
Matt Hall is a research scientist at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. And the point of that story is that there is another way to think of plants. And once you acknowledge that they are intelligent living beings and our biological relatives, there are moral and ethical questions that follow. Like, do they deserve rights? As Steve points out, that is kind of a foreign concept.
Plants are usually just background. And that harks back to Aristotle. Essentially, Aristotle put forward the view that plants existed for the sake of animals and human beings. And they were here as supporting caste, and that really denied them a life and a purpose or a world of their own.
What I find so striking about some of your work is you talk about the moral standing of plants.
Yeah.
In recent decades, we've heard a lot about the moral rights of animals or the humane treatment of animals, but we almost never hear about that in terms of plants. I mean, actually talking about our relationship with plants as a moral issue.
Yeah. Even for myself, I sometimes think that is just so far from our ordinary framing of the world that I sometimes just check myself. But if you think about it in these terms, plants, they're the foundation of life on Earth. They form the bulk of the visible biomass of Earth. I often think of plants as almost synonymous with nature, and yet they're backgrounded. They're outside of our moral concern because they're objects and we can do with them what we want. And so you see what's happening around the world. Human beings just plow on, developing, consuming ecosystems, turning them over to human projects. You think of the Amazon rainforest, that's plant life.
Yeah.
And if we leave those plants outside of our moral concern, and therefore often outside of our legal concern, we're in trouble.
So I'm curious about why you use the word person, plants as persons, because personhood has a particular philosophical tradition. I think it has a legal standing. What does that mean, the personhood of plants?
I do use that term deliberately. There are two different types of persons, natural persons and legal persons, as far as I understand it. So, natural persons are human beings, and legal persons in our current legal system predominantly has been extended to corporations. However, in New Zealand, personhood has been granted to non-human ecosystems.
Right, to a river, right?
So the Wanganui River and Te Urewera, formerly a national park, has now been given back to the Māori owners of that and now has legal personhood. As far as I understand, for the Wanganui River, the claim for the personhood that was put forward in very specific treaty negotiation stems really from a whakapapa, which is a Māori term for ancestry or genealogical kinship. And the fact that this is a living being with its own presence and has rights that it itself can enforce in court via its guardians, it's a very different situation. Personhood as a concept philosophically can lead you to this idea of, actually, these beings have rights that can be enforced in the legal system. I think we're a long way from that for individual plants. Let's be realistic.
So how does that play out for you? Do you think of individual plants or trees as having their own being?
Yeah, I do. And the land behind our house up here is very steep, and we have an invasive tree, an acacia from Australia, that if it was left to its own devices would pretty much suffocate the rest of the native trees. So I talk about violence towards plants, which is necessary for human beings to live.
We have to eat and we have to wear clothes.
Yeah.
How do you figure that into your moral system of relating to plants?
We have to take plant lives to live. My natural reaction towards violence is to try and minimize it. So I haven't just gone on a brazen chainsaw kind of massacre around. It's been very selective. And when I've done that, I'm killing something. And my natural bent is trying not to do that unless I have to. And then also to make use of that loss of life in the best possible way. But it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
We've got thousands of years of philosophical baggage we're carrying that says exactly the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Matt, I'm wondering if we could end with just a takeaway for our listeners, maybe a practice, a kinship practice relating to a plant or a group of plants as persons, what we might do that people could think about.
So I've talked about one of the practices I do. It seems so simple that perhaps it seems banal, but trust me on this, I guess. A practice that I do myself, when I remember, and I don't always remember, but when I do remember, it is transformative. When I go out into the garden and my wife will ask me to get some leaves or some mint last night for a meal for us, before I go and just grab that and take it, I stop and I ask for permission. The plant's not going to respond to me. That's not the point. I ask for permission. It's telling me, really, I'm not in this domineering place. I'm about to take some of this being and eat it. The least I could do is ask for permission. It's a very simple act. But for me, it completely transforms our inherited philosophical view of plants as something that we can just take and dominate whenever we like. For me, that's a really good place to start, and as a practice that will generate the desire for other ways of relating that we can both scale up individually and collectively.
Matthew Hall is the author of 2 books, Plants as Persons and The Imagination of Plants. Steve Paulson reached him in New Zealand, where Matt is a research scientist at Victoria University. And if that conversation stretched your mind, wait till you hear the next one. Steve tracked down one of the leaders of the new science of vegetal consciousness.
Do you think plants have feelings? Do they feel joy or pain?
All of these tricky questions. My own personal experience would tell me that they definitely feel many things. They're feeling bodies. We are feeling bodies.
It's to the best of our knowledge from Wisconsin Public Radio and PRX. I'm guessing there is a houseplant or 2 or 10 in your life. So here's a question. Do you talk to them? And do they ever talk back? Well, that might not be as crazy as it sounds. Steve Paulson is here to explain.
If you're old enough, you might remember a book called The Secret Life of Plants. It was a bestseller during the heyday of New Age pseudoscience, and it made a bunch of wild claims.
In our chemical union with the 4 genii of creation, air, fire, water, and earth, plants turn the desert into a garden.
Plants respond to people's thoughts, even feelings. They can predict storms and earthquakes. They prefer classical music to rock.
Absorbing light from the sun and nourishment from the waters, sprouting plants through billions of tiny lips give forth oxygen to purify the air and invigorate the earth.
Well, today there is a group of maverick plant scientists who are once again making far-fetched claims about plants. Except this time it's based in real science. If you follow this stuff, one name that comes up a lot is Monica Galliano, an Italian evolutionary ecologist who's now at the University of Sydney in Australia. She had a hypothesis that plants actually have the capacity to learn and remember. And to test it, she took a plant you might have heard of, Mimosa pudica. It's often called the sensitive plant, because if you touch it, the leaves instantly close. And she devised a series of ingenious experiments.
I basically built a little contraption that allowed me to drop the plants. Drop them from a little height of maybe 15 centimeters, so it's not too high. And when they fall, they land in a really softy, padded base. So I always say the disclaimer is that no plants were hurt in the process of these experiments, and no plants were killed in the process of these experiments.
So you did this over and over. You kept dropping the plants repeatedly.
Constantly, continuously for 60 times. And then there will be a big pause and I let them rest, and then I do it again.
Galliano had a basic question. How long would it take these plants to realize there was no actual threat when they were dropped? Therefore, no reason to close their leaves. It seemed like it would take a while.
But actually, the plants already were reopening their leaves after the first 3 to 6 drops of those 60. And that's like within a few minutes, basically. They knew exactly what was going on. And like, oh my God, this is really annoying, but it doesn't mean anything. So I'm just going to not bother closing, or even better, I closed at the beginning because I didn't know what this was. But now I got it. I understand that there is no threat coming. So I'm just going to reopen my leaves, because when my leaves are open, I can eat light.
What's so striking about the way Galliano describes this experiment are the words she uses. She says the plants understand and learn there is no longer a threat. And there's something else she wanted to know. Can they actually remember what they've learned? So she left these same plants alone for a month and then did another round of drops. And guess what? This time, they didn't bother closing their leaves.
So that is definitely memory. And that is the same kind of experiment that we would do if this was a bee or a mouse or anything. So for me, to use the word memory and learning feels totally appropriate. And I know that some people, some of my colleagues, accuse me of being anthropomorphizing, but actually there's nothing anthropomorphic about this. These are terms that refers to certain processes.
And you are not using these words like learning and remembering metaphorically. I mean, you mean this literally.
Yes, because that's what they are.
There was one other question Galiano had. Do plants actually have the capacity to make choices? So she devised another experiment, this time with peas. She built them a maze with 2 different paths.
The test is actually make a choice between left and right. What are you going to go for? And the choice is based on what you might gain if you choose one side or the other.
And the enticement? On one side, the sound of water.
And of course, they want water, so they will use the signal to follow that arm of the maze and trying to find the source of water, which is what they're after.
So you're saying plants can hear water?
Oh, yeah, of course.
How did you determine that?
Well, initially, it's just a matter of asking the question, is sound relevant to the life of plants? And as we did, we have discovered, of course, that not only plants emit their own sounds,
they also hear sounds. And Galiano isn't just talking about electrical signals. She means actual audible sounds. What kind of sounds do they make?
Well, the one that we recorded sounded like, we call them clicks because it was the closest thing that we could have. And this is where language might fail, but we call them clicks at this stage. But then we also knew and worked out that, yep, plants not only produce their own sound, which is amazing, but of course they are listening to the sounds.
You are describing a level of intelligence here in these plants that it's pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, basically. They don't have neurons, they don't have a brain, which is often what we assume is the base for all of these behaviors, but they seem to be doing the same things. Really, that's what it is, and it belongs to the cognitive realm. So that's why I define all of this work as cognitive ecology.
Of course, this is a very controversial position among scientists, and the common criticism of your views is that an organism needs a brain, or at least a nervous system, to be able to learn or remember. Plants don't have neurons. Are you saying that maybe neurons are not the be-all and end-all that we make them out to be?
Well, what I'm saying is that science is full of assumptions. They're like axioms, like you don't question that one. But in fact, who said the brain and the neurons are essential for any form of intelligence or learning or cognition or any of those? It's like, who decided that? That's the thing. Can you, as a scientist, create the space for these others expressing their own, in this case, plantness, instead of expecting them to become animal-like?
Now here is where the whole subject of plantness gets even more interesting. There's an emerging discipline of what's called vegetal consciousness. The idea is that plants don't just have the capacity to learn and remember and make choices. They actually have some inner awareness, maybe even an emotional life. This is definitely not the view of most scientists. And I have to say, when I first heard this, it sounded kind of crazy. But the more I looked into the literature, and not just what scientists were saying, but how some people describe their own very personal experiences with plants, it all started to sound possible. Do you think plants have feelings? Do they feel joy or pain?
All of these tricky questions. Well, again, yes and no. It depends on what you mean by feeling and joy and all of that. And it also depends where you're expecting the plant to feel those things, if they do, the way in which you recognize them, so in a human way. Plants might have more joy than we do. It's just we don't know because we're not plants. So the only way that we express and know about joy is in our way, in our human way. My own personal experience would tell me that they definitely feel many things. They're feeling bodies. We are feeling bodies.
Of course, scientists have always struggled when trying to explain the origins of consciousness. There's only so much you can glean through a lab experiment, but there are other ways to get to know a plant, more personal and intimate and even mind-altering ways. And this is where Monica Galliano's story takes a left turn, away from what she considers the limitations of both modern science and the Western worldview.
The worldview that I'm talking about are, for example, but not only, the indigenous worldview.
Yeah.
And why is that less valuable? Why that way of knowing is being completely wiped under the carpet as if it doesn't have anything to say? And what happens is that when you actually do explore those perspectives, and those worldview require your experience. You can't just understand them by thinking about them. And so by experiencing them, and the answer to that initial question, are plants conscious, then it becomes very simple. It's like, why are we even asking the question?
So I want to go there with you because this is another piece of your story, and that is your experience working with shamans in indigenous cultures and the experience of taking ayahuasca and other psychoactive plants. Why did you seek out those kinds of experiences?
I didn't. They seeked me. So I just followed, as I said before.
Well, how did they seek you? They called you in some way?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, they just arrive in your life and you know that those are important doors that you need to open and you walk through, or not. And I just simply decided to walk through. I had this weird series of dreams while I was in Australia doing my normal life, let's say, and it was a series of 3 dreams. And by the time the 3rd dream came, it was very clear that the place that I was dreaming of, the people that I was dreaming of, were real people that were waiting somewhere in this reality, in this world. And next thing I know, I'm buying a ticket and I'm going to Peru. And my partner at the time is looking at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I have no idea, but I need to go. And I guess I find that as a scientist, this is the most scientific approach that I've ever had. There is something that is asking a question. The answer is already there and is waiting for you if you are prepared to open the door and cross through, and I did.
So what did you do in Peru?
Well, I ended up finding this place that was in my dream, for example, the first time I went. And there it was. It was just exactly the same hat as I saw it in my dream. It was the same man that I saw in my dream. And I was there for a while and I just worked with him and trying to learn as much as I could about myself, really.
This man with a hat was a plant shaman in the Amazon lowlands. Galliano calls him Don M in her memoir, Thus Spoke the Plant. He told her there was a particular tree, a cicaba, that was trying to communicate with her. To learn how to listen, she drank a daily dose of medicine made from the tree's bark. She also took ayahuasca. And the tree started visiting her dreams and talking to her. All that happened a decade ago, and now Galliano says plants talk to her all the time without hallucinogens.
Yeah, they did then and they do all the time. And I'm not, I don't have any strange psychological, psychiatric disorder.
I'm just so curious about how this worked for you. I mean, when you say the plant talked to you, was this in sort of a telepathic way? I mean, did you actually hear words? How did this work?
For all of us who had those experiences, it's very obvious. And in fact, most of the time when people haven't had the experience and you're trying to describe it, they struggle and it makes probably not much sense because, again, this kind of knowledge requires your participation, literally. I don't necessarily hear words as such. I don't hear like someone talking to me as if from the outside talking to me with sound. But yet, even that is not correct because inside my head, it does sound exactly like a conversation. And not only that, but I know it's not me. I know that some of the information that's been shared with me, there is no way that I would know about that stuff.
What you're saying is that these plants had information to tell you they were your teachers, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yep.
Were there specific things that they told you that, I don't know, took your life or your research, your work in different directions?
Yep. Some of the plants, as I have described in the book, told me exactly how wrong I was thinking about my experiments and how I should be doing them to get them to work. And I'm like, really? And I'm scribbling down without really understanding. And then when I go in the lab and I try what they say, and even then, there is a part of me that doesn't really believe it. So I do the experiment as I'm told, I set it up and everything. And then it's like, nah, this is not working. And what an idiot. I was thinking that a plant from the other side of the world is going to tell me how to do my science. And then actually, it took a little bit longer and a bit more attention to realize, oh, actually, it is working. Oh, so even against my own skeptical mind of like, this is all, what am I doing? The plants already knew.
Remember that experiment with the peas that navigated a maze to find water? Galliano says she originally was trying to do that experiment with sunflowers.
At one point, the plant just turned up and just as flamboyantly as this said, by the way, not sunflowers, peas. And I'm like,
the plant told
what?
you that?
And, so people always think that, when you do these experiences, you're supposed to understand the secrets of the cosmos and the universe and you become one with God or whatever else. No, my plants are usually quite practical. And they were right.
Monica Galliano is an evolutionary ecologist at the University of Sydney in Australia. And if that doesn't make you think differently about plants, I don't know what else could. So what's the next step? How do we, in our own everyday lives, develop a personal, reciprocal relationship with plants? I mean, what would that even look like? Well, let me introduce a friend. Meet Brooke Hecht.
In Iceland, I studied birches. I had 3 different forest sites. So I gathered thousands of leaves from different parts of the birch and did a lot of analysis of their nitrogen and their carbon and, a lot of other factors. Since it's light 24 hours in Iceland, I guess I spent a lot of time there. And also because the growing season is so short, in order to collect all the data and all the plant samples that I wanted, I had to work around the clock. But it was incredibly rewarding. I will never forget I could lie down on the big fluffy moss. The moss is so beautiful. It's like you imagine a fairy bed to be. It is so thick, so beautiful. And I could lie down in that and drink directly from the streams.
As a plant ecologist, Brooke knows plants. But then a few years ago, she went to a professional conference. She's a working mom, and she took her daughter along with her. And as kids do, her daughter got sick.
She had an infection on her knee. It was a scrape she'd gotten the week before. It started really hurting, and Tara is not a complainer. And so when she was saying how much it really hurt, I was thinking, well, what should I do? And I don't really have medicine. And one of the other conference participants took a balm out of her purse that she had made that had yarrow and other plants in it. And she put it on Tara's knee, and the redness started disappearing right away. I had never seen anything like that happening in real time where it went away. And I think as an ecologist, I had this deep sense that I was only just beginning to scratch the surface of my understanding with plants.
So what did you do when you went home? Did you go home and dig up your lawn?
Yes.
What did you put in?
Well, I definitely wanted yarrow. It has such a long history of being used as a medicinal. Thyme is another one. Thyme is antifungal, it's antibacterial. Sage has anti-inflammatory properties. Oregano. Oregano is fascinating. It is known to have antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, antibacterial properties. The essential oil of oregano kills MRSA. I will say the one that I use the most is lemon balm for anxiety, and especially in 2020, I've had lemon balm in my tea every day. When many of us came down with COVID, I think I had a relatively mild version. But that being said, I still felt that the virus attacked all these different parts of my body. When I had nausea, I felt it was really helpful to take a bath that had mint and also yarrow, which is known to break fevers. As I felt it settling into my lungs, well, that was when I brought out the oregano and the thyme and also Minarda bee balm, which has long been used for colds and flu and upper respiratory, to really inhale the steam, just get that right into my lungs. I'd feel so much better after doing the body oils. My lungs would feel better after I did the steams, and that's kind of what I went with. Sometimes after the steams, when I'd have oregano and thyme and bee balm, I would just dump those steams into the bath, and then I'd throw some other things in as well. All these plants in the tub, which I didn't put into any kind of bag or anything else. I was literally floating in this kind of green pool. I was in awe that there were plants with these extraordinary properties that were in this bath and that were helping me. I just thought, well, how did this even happen? I mean, that's just unbelievable.
So how did your relationship with plants begin to change? Because you have a PhD in plant ecology. It's not like you don't know a ton about plants to begin with.
I think one thing that changed is, rather than studying plants, learning about them, how they work, I was understanding that the plants had gifts to give me. And it's a pretty big change in mindset if you actually experience it. When a plant is giving you a gift and you put that gift on your child's knee, you have a relationship that cultivates gratitude and reciprocity. So instead of trying to go out and understand, is the forest stressed, the way I did for my PhD, now I might go out to the Minarda, as I did this summer, to the bee balm, and try to think, gosh, it's getting that powdery mildew. How do I help this plant that helped me when I was developing a cough with coronavirus? How do I help this plant thrive and survive? It feels like a relationship with actual plants that are there when I step out the door.
Do you think of the plants as persons?
I will tell you that it's taken me time, but I do understand now. There are human people, and there are birch people, and there are bee balm people. We've forgotten that there's healing all around us. And especially in this time where so many people are feeling in need of healing, feeling in need of community. And, the plants are all around us, and we can invite and welcome back more of them.
Brooke Hecht is the president of the Center for Humans and Nature in Chicago, our partner in the Kinship Project, a podcast about the more than human world. Thanks to everybody else whose ideas you heard today. Robin Wall-Kimmerer, Matthew Hall, and Monica Galliano. You'll find more about all of them at ttbook.org/kinship. Support for this hour and for the Kinship Project comes from the Kalliopeia Foundation. Thanks also to our amazing team of producers, Angela Bautista, Shannon Henry Kleiber, Charles Monroe Kane, and Mark Rickers. Steve Paulson is our executive producer, and this week's lush sound design is by Joe Hartke. I'm Anne Strainchamps. Be well, and join us again next time.